Sport is meant to bring people together, but for so many bisexual people, the world of athletics has felt like anything but a level playing field.
Whether it's growing up in locker rooms where being queer felt unsafe or seeing top athletes still afraid to come out, it's clear that sport has a long way to go before we all get a fair shot.
Shout out to bottom athletes and side athletes as well. But let's be real here. The conversation is always, where are the gay athletes? But why aren't we asking, where are the bisexual ones? It's time to change the game.
Today, we are diving into bi+ representation in sport, the wins, the fouls, and the athletes who are fighting for visibility.
From the biphobia baked into mainstream sporting culture to the local teams creating inclusive spaces, we are breaking down why bisexuality is still benched in the world of athletics.
So whether you are a diehard fan, casual spectator, or just someone who wants to feel seen in the game, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. This is Give It To Me Bi, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything from a bi+ perspective. Now, let us give it to you bi. Give It To Me Bi acknowledge that we live and work on Gadigal land. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land and pay our respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. Hey, my love, how are you?
I'm good, my beautiful Chadney Spears. How are you?
Chadney Spears, I'm well, thank you. Well, I am finally well. You might hear my voice a little bit of a rasp, a little bit of a sexy phone voice, but I've been quite unwell for the last week, actually, since Fair Day. Fair Day, for those listening at home, is part of our Mardi Gras celebrations, our month-long celebrations, where it's kind of like a big, what do you call it, like a fete, I guess, a big market, stalls and, and food trucks and that kind of thing.
They used to call it Puffs in the Park.
Puffs in the Park, great, yes, nice. I was helping out at the Sydney Bi+ Network tent. We got to meet a lot of community members, which is fantastic. A lot of new people meeting SBN for the first time, and I guess consequently meeting me and the podcast for the first time. I met a good friend of yours, actually, who was very excited to say hello, Ben Bavington.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Ben is the lead investigator on the BISH study, plus sexual health and HIV needs study. So I'm so glad you got to meet Ben. What a legend.
We gushed over each other for like a good 5-10 minutes. They ran up to me and was like, oh my gosh, I have to say hello. I was like, I think I know who you are. And we gushed about you for a while. and the BISH study, again, to anyone listening, that is wrapping up very shortly in the next week, I think. So link in the show notes for the BISH study. So I'm on the mend.
Yeah, a lot of people were sick, but only for one day because they drank way too much. Mm-hmm. I left at about 6 p.m. when things were starting to look pretty rowdy. So like 100,000 people, over 100,000 people.
You left at 6?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah. So over 100,000 people go to Fair Day. It's enormous.
Huge.
You know, there are hundreds and hundreds of stalls. There are multiple stages. JoJo's Siwa performed. And unlike JoJo's fake drinking, there was a whole lot of real drinking. And at 6, I was like, yeah, it's time for me to bounce.
Yeah, wow, Granny Steve.
I've had a couple of vodka sodas that day, which was nice. I'm not tumbling down those hills at 9 p.m. anymore, which
100,000
we used to do in the good old days. Yeah.
Yeah. It felt really special to be able to bring Heidi and Dallas along to Fair Day and have Dallas. Dallas loves rainbows. And so anything Mardi Gras is excited. We call it, we're going to the rainbow party. And so he got to go to the rainbow party and go in the tent and look at all the rainbows and loved it. So it was nice to I don't know, like, I feel like being a queer parent is an interesting thing that I am learning to navigate. I think I'll always have to learn to navigate. Like, there's no reason for Dallas to care at this point. Dallas is 2, but it's still cool to like have this experience with them. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cool. And some news. I have committed. I am going to be in the Mardi Gras parade. And so it looks like we're both going to be in the Mardi Gras parade this year, Steve.
Which float are you going on, Chad?
I'm going to go on the Biconic float. We're going to represent our bis. And
awesome.
I have an update from last week, actually. The whole float has now sold out. So thank you to everybody who rallied around Biconic and Brie and getting those tickets sold. The bi float, the only bi float in this year's Mardi Gras will go ahead, and it will be full of bisexuals. So big claps to the community who rallied around that.
So happy to hear. That makes me so happy to hear, because it is just so important and so much fun. Do you know where in the lineup of the floats you are?
Good question. I think it's pretty late. From memory, I think it's late in the hundreds.
We start marching at 10:30 p.m.
Ooh, wow! Where are you in the float?
We must be last. We must be almost dead last.
Yeah, wow!
It's time for my bylight, and I'm looking at my notes, and I was obviously feeling some kind of way. But
I'm looking at your notes. I'm like, what is happening here? Existential crisis in your bylights.
It is an existential crisis. So summer for me is like so much pressure. So I don't know. I get social anxiety. I think a lot of people do. And there's just so much pressure to live up to the expectations of I'm doing all of these things and having so much fun. And sometimes I just want to be a potato. And especially because I'm training so hard over summer, like all I can do is be a potato. Then you get the guilt, and then you're just like, but I'm actually doing what I want to do. Anyways, I've also come to the realization that I'm getting old. Right? Now, I'm not going to tell people how old I am, because I'm not old, but like looking forward, we've got obviously the Mardi Gras period, and we've got all of these, there are just hundreds of parties coming up, and I hadn't got any tickets for them. Go back 2 years, and I did 15. I had 15 individual ticketed parties for one Mardi Gras 2-week period. And I keep
was that World Pride? That was a lot.
That was at World Pride, yeah.
Yeah.
I keep on trying to wanting to relive the glory days without realizing
you're in the glory days.
Without realizing,
okay.
I'm okay. Like, I'm actually doing what I want to do. And like, I remember last year at Mardi Gras, I forced myself to go to all of these parties, and I had a terrible time. Like, I just...
You can't push yourself.
I was tired. Like, social groups changed.
What's the successful time? Is it successful because you got pissed more, or you danced more, or like that's not successful. Successful time is I enjoyed myself, or I did the thing I set out to do.
Exactly.
I've been to no parties. I am fine.
Well, okay, maybe this is the realization that, you know, this old party girl is done.
Hang up the wigs, babe.
Hang up the wig. Throw out the heels.
Throw out your cha-cha heels.
Anyway. And, you know, I took a moment to just say to myself, be grateful for what you have, because what you've got is fantastic and it's amazing, and your life is going so well. So stop trying to be an old version of yourself. Stop trying to relive these glory days. They were glory days because they happened in the moment. Let's make new ones.
And I feel like a big part of like your health journey, all that kind of stuff, is like trying to not rely on these big nights of getting wasted and doing it for 2 weeks straight to kind of feel some kind of buzz. And you kind of get this natural buzz by doing all the work that you're doing. I feel like there's a push-pull probably of like your new reality versus an old reality that you had fun in, but like maybe isn't who you are anymore.
This is the thing. This is what Chris, my partner, said to me. He's like, that's not who you are. Why are you trying to, you know, be something that you were, but that you are not anymore? And it's like, oh, good. And so like, I was just having all these freak outs, like, oh, I need everything to be organized, all of this. And I'm like, oh, chill out. You've actually got some amazing things coming up. I've got a couple of really fun parties. And I'm in the parade. That's going to be just the most amazing time. I'm going to art events. I'm going to see friends, and also just walking around the streets and soaking up the atmosphere is just so awesome. So I'm just grateful for what I've got.
One of the things that Heidi and I struggle with the most becoming parents is allowing us the space to just be parents. Like we pushed back against it for such a long time. We didn't want to have kids young. We kind of renounced that idea even after having Dallas. We're like, oh, but I want to be the cool parent who still does all the things and just brings the baby along, which we did for a long time, and it was great. But it got easier when we just said, we can allow ourselves to be parents. That's okay. Things come in seasons, and you might have this party season and then a hibernation season, and then you might have another party season. Doesn't mean it's over forever, but you will. I feel like you would feel a dose of energy if you were to lean into the season of rest and comfort and self-prioritizing.
And self-prioritizing is a big part of it as well, because at the moment my fitness is actually my goal, is my main focus. Yeah, so I'm getting old and I'm growing up.
Now we've got
snaps for Steve.
I wanted to talk about some fun news. One of our favorite things to talk about on the podcast, statistics, and in particular, the Gallup poll.
What does that say about us?
That we are informed, thoughtful people, Steve, is what it says about us. And big nerds is what it means. So the new Gallup poll has come out this week, which is very exciting. One of the things that I noticed about this Gallup poll is just the title of the article that I saw it in was nearly 1 in 10 Americans now identify as LGBTQ+, thanks to bisexuals and Gen Z. Wow. Oh my gosh.
They said the word.
He said the word. Now, I've got a little table in our notes here just to compare last year's stats with this year's stats. Overall, generally speaking, out of LGBTQ adults, we're about the same, right? 57% last year, 56% this year. We're steady, although out of that's for bisexual identification. But amongst US adults, we've actually jumped. So 4.4% last year to 5.2% this year. And then the overall identification of queer people, last year was 7.6%, and it's jumped to 9.3%. So we had a jump in 2020, which we all kind of talked about. Everyone was kind of stuck at home, mulling over, who am I, what I want in life, and maybe I'm a bit queer. And the last year, something like that has happened again. It's a similar jump, which is really interesting. And I'm intrigued as to why that might be. What do you reckon, Steve? Why last year?
LGBTIQ plus issues and topics are being discussed in the mainstream, often negatively, but they are they have become really central to the culture wars we're seeing here in the West. And I think maybe just because we are talking about it, people are being exposed to it and perhaps interrogating themselves over it. So maybe the anti-LGBTIQ plus people spouting their hate on the television and on the internet might be having the opposite effect of what they want to do.
That's an intriguing point of view. I think I agree with that. I am seeing, and they've also made a note in this Gallup study, that whether due to political sorting or something else, Democrats and independents identify far more likely with LGBTQ. So 14% Democrats, 11% independents, but 3% Republicans. But it's even stronger when you just talk about ideology. So if you're generally left, 21% of liberals, they call them in the States, or left, compared with 8% of moderates and 3% of conservatives. So I think you might be right. There is some kind of truth to the fact that the thing that is spoken about, whether positively or negatively, is now being spoken about. And so it is undoubtedly in people's minds more. And potentially, if people recognize an element of that in themselves, a topic like all the fuckery that's going on at the moment would galvanize some people to say, you know what? I'm going to stand in my truth a little bit more. I'm going to come out. I'm going to do the thing. So I think you're right. I think there's a little bit of truth in. Maybe it's the Streisand effect. If trying to hide it, trying to get people to not notice it is making people take notice.
I love that. I'd love to hear from the listeners if you all have an opinion or a theory on why this is happening. This has happened over the last, is it 12 months, Chad?
Last 12 months. Now, there is another potential input here. They've said the recent increase is largely due to more adults in their late teens, 20s, and 30s, as we know, particularly young women saying they're bisexual. So I'm looking at the LGBTQ by generation data, and the Gen Z is about the same. Last year's 22%, this year's 23%. It's about the same. However, last year's data said that 9.8% of millennials were out as queer. This year, 14.2% of millennials are out. So there's a big jump in millennials. Yeah. So we've spoken previously about there is a shift for millennial women saying, you know what, I'm done with my boyfriend, or I'm done with my husband, or whatever it might be. Maybe I do like the girls or whatever. And I think we are seeing a move of women reckoning with the comp het idea of like, maybe I don't have to live a certain way. Maybe I've just been told I need to live a certain way, and challenging those notions for themselves. And the data is starting to back that up a little bit. Super interesting.
Fabulous.
And it's also interesting, all of the generations have jumped up a little bit. So silent generation, last year 1.1, this year 1.8. Baby boomers last year 2.3, this year 3.0. And Gen X last year 4.5, this year 5.1. So little gains in each generation. But that millennial jump, huge. It's a 5% jump for overall queer identification. So unreal. Good on you. Good on you, the girls. On the Australian census, the ABS has released some information on some of the questions they're going to be putting in the census. Just some general updates, but the one that is interesting to me is an introduction of a separate question on sex recorded at birth, which will differentiate from the new gender identity question. So this will undoubtedly be able to show us how many trans folks there are in the country. Interesting. That's how they are doing that one, the 2-question method instead of are you trans?
That's a question I often see in surveys. It'll be, what is your gender? And then what was your gender recorded at birth?
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. You may have seen end of last year, start of this year, unfortunately, a member of One Direction passed away. Liam Payne. It was an unfortunate circumstance. We won't kind of get into the details of that. But this week, it has come out, or people have alleged, that Liam Payne had struggled with his sexuality. And there's talk about potential relationships with men and all this kind of stuff. Now, I don't know how I feel about talking about someone's sexuality after they have passed. It feels a bit icky. It's the outing conversation that we've spoken about previously. That feels off. How do we as a media, as a community, how do we approach a topic like this, do you think? Do you think it's appropriate for us to talk about at all? Do you think it's let people lie? Is it a hopeful thing for people to see, oh, wow, this person was like me? Where do you stand on it?
I'm going to silo my response. So I'm going to give a response ignoring the Liam Payne and celebrity aspect of this.
Sure.
We know that the vast majority of bisexual men are not out. And we know how many bisexual men take their own lives. Or we know that very many bisexual men take their own lives. How do we have a discussion about that? Can we only discuss the ones that were out when there's an ocean of bisexual men who have taken their own lives who will never be seen? Or do we actually try and face it and try and have a nuanced and respectful and consensus-driven discussion around how do we discuss someone's sexuality after they have passed away in order to bring visibility to something that is extraordinarily important? We know that bi men's mental health is in crisis. And because so many bisexual men are not out, it's a catch-22. I err on the side of it's a topic that needs to be discussed. I don't think it's a topic that should be discussed in specifics, which is why I don't know Liam Payne's sexuality. So, the headline here is struggled with his sexuality. There could be another conversation about how bisexual men are losing their lives.
It's really thoughtful. This is a topic that is one we are rallying about on the podcast. I know in the work we're doing at Sydney Bi Plus Network and all the studies that are coming out about bi health, the mental health disparities and differences are alarming. And yeah, the do we only talk about people who make it through feels wrong, right? That feels like you're not doing justice to the people who needed the help and might not have received
the majority of us. The majority of bi men are not out.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe it's not about the individual person, and maybe it's, again, that framing, the idea of struggled with or whatever, like that kind of, it creates a narrative, and we don't know, this person can't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
We do know that when people are in the closet or when people are struggling with their sexuality and have mental health issues, that maybe they do partake in risky behaviors, that they do perhaps have relationships that are secretive, but those are usually either a call for help or they are a last resort. And again, we're talking about men's mental health as well as bi mental health. The avenue of communication just isn't there for support for a lot of people. So it's an interesting one. And so his partner has talked to press, saying that they knew that they had these conversations or there were potential complications there. And then the partner has then been slammed about sharing those things. And it's like, oh, well, I wonder what, like, that's her story as well. I wonder, like, what right does she have to her story to share? You know, I mean, that's not just someone else's story at that point. That's yours as well. And I'm so intrigued with that. It's like, my experience of your life is now my story.
There's also a more meta way of looking at it in that it's not just his story and her story, it's also the story of bisexual men. And how can we not take ownership, but pay respect and draw attention? Because, I mean, look, I'll be really honest here. I could have easily ended up like Liam Payne before I came out.
Yeah.
It was really heading that way, to be very honest with you. And personally, I wouldn't want my experience to be erased. I would actually want people to know.
Thank you. That's really thoughtful answer. I find it hard to talk about all the Trump stuff at the moment because there is so much of it, right? And I'd never know which ones to highlight or talk about or not talk about. But one that you and I are particularly passionate about is the idea of queer legacy and activism, advocacy. And one thing this month has really pissed me off. And that is, amongst all of the removing of transgender and queer language from all government departments, which is just atrocious, they have erased the Stonewall transgender history and have now, across all Stonewall government websites, all that kind of stuff, have called it an LGB landmark. And it's like, Stonewall doesn't exist without our trans siblings. Like, it is, oh man.
Queer rights do not exist without trans people. Trans people are queer rights, are human
trans
rights.
People of color, like, oh my gosh. And I just am so triggered by the government removing any of this language, but especially T and Q, and seeing the LGB, because I know that there are groups out there. So they're queer groups who are actively against our transgender siblings and people in our community. There's tons of people that talk about B without the T. And to me, it's horseshit. If that's one of you, get out. I just, I'm not here for it.
Do you mean LGB without the T?
Both. So yeah, I see LGB without the T, and it makes me so furious. We are such an intertwined community. There are so many bi people who are trans. There's so many trans people who are bi. Our communities are fighting the same fight, and it makes me so upset to see people kind of casting off their own communities. And for what? Like, what do you get out of it? Like, I don't understand. It makes me upset. But there's been some good pushback. And the cool thing I'm seeing, all these big sweeping things that like Trump's trying to do are starting to get blocked by judges. And so these are big declarative things, kind of putting through these executive orders, which is just bizarre. And people are getting overwhelmed by it because they've done so much of it. And it's a tactic, we've talked about that previously, to just overwhelm people, make people feel helpless, make people not be able to follow what's happening. But that's actually, it's not the end of the story when these things get pushed through. Usually what happens is it then has to go through court. And a lot of these measures are being blocked. It's nice to see that there are people doing their job, fighting the good fight, and just saying, this is horseshit. I'm not rolling over for this clown. And we can rest assured that there are people that look after our communities, whether they are part of that community or not. There are people fighting the fight for us as well.
I'm always really shocked when I see these anti-trans movements within the queer community. Like there are organizations like the LGBT Alliance, which wants to separate the notion of sexuality and gender for whatever reason. Well, their reasons are stated and they're disgusting. It's exclusionary. They're rewriting history. It's just awful. And it's grossly transphobic. But then I also look at it because I don't know, LGB, why are you bringing us into it? Because every bi plus community I've been a part of has been so trans inclusive. So many trans people are bi, so many bi people are trans. I sort of look at it, I'm like, what is this lesbian and gay nonsense? And then when you actually look at the membership of the groups, you're like, oh yeah, it is mostly lesbians and gays. And I've always said in a lot of my advocacy, there's always an assumption that bi people are natural bedfellows to lesbians and gays. And I push back on that because our experiences are very unique. And I don't know about you, Chad, but in a lot of my own journey of understanding, living in this, I don't know, grey area or living as a person that's been erased and, I'm not comparing the experiences of bi plus people to those of trans people. They are both very unique, but I've always found an extraordinary affinity with our trans siblings and a shared understanding of sort of what it's like to be different within a community that's meant to be inclusive. And so, it's not a new thing.
No, it's not.
Executive orders, it's not a new thing, but it is broad and sweeping, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing, hopefully, these being rescinded.
I have never seen a bi community that isn't so inclusive from the get-go of like, oh, okay, you disagree with us or you're different from us, but you are welcome. Like the bi events I go to, like the bi social night in Newtown every month, it's so wonderful. Tons of bis there. There's also a bunch of lesbians and a bunch of gays. They come along and they hang out like as bis and allies, right? Even the bi floats. It's like, cool, bis and allies. It's like, that's awesome. like I've never seen a bi community where inclusion wasn't like the cornerstone, like the foundation of what it was built on. And so it like boggles my mind when I see it.
Well, I just want to make this very strong point that Give It To Me Bi is trans inclusive. We love our trans listeners. We will love all future trans listeners. Please come and listen to our podcast. Even if you're not listening to us, we love you. This is a safe space for you. This is a place for you. We want this to be a trans inclusive space at Give It To Me.
Sport is not something that I have some massive affinity with. I grew up playing sport. I come from a sporting family. My father is quite a sporty person and played rep football, rowing, he did shooting, he did everything. My grandfather was in the Olympics. My brother played rep basketball. My sister played rep basketball. I tried. I flailed and failed. and I was just never very comfortable in sports. I gave it a red hot crack for a while. Wasn't my thing though. And at a certain
kids,
age,
you're sort of forced to do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing.
Well,
when you
absolutely
turn 4 or 5, 4 or 5, you go join a soccer team. Like that's, or football for other people listening.
School sports was compulsory at my school.
School sports.
You had to do a Saturday sport.
Yeah. Yeah. And at a certain age, I kind of started falling out of love with it. Well, maybe I didn't love it ever, but I grew up a not very athletic kid. I've always been a bigger kid, and that didn't bode well for me in sports. And then at a certain age in school, I kind of realized like, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable around these other kids. I went to an all-boys religious high school. Being queer was not, didn't play to my advantage at all. What was your experience with sport as you grew up?
Yeah, similar. My cousin was the captain of the New Zealand All Blacks, the national rugby team.
Really?
And also the world champions of rugby. So I grew up with like World Cups in my kitchen.
Yeah, wow.
So I grew up back in New Zealand, of course, in a pretty rugby-heavy family. But I was never forced into it. I'm very, very grateful. My parents always let me just experiment and spread my wings. So I tried every single sport at school. I settled on tennis because I rely on myself and only myself. There were bits and bobs. I enjoyed skiing, again, a solo sport. I much preferred solo sports, and that might have something to do with the uncomfortableness that I have in those team environments when we're talking about team sports.
Is that needing to rely on others, or others rely on you, or is it just general uncomfort around other? Because it's usually men as well. You're not playing mixed code sports.
No.
Is it uncomfort around other men and boys?
Yeah, that as well. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, it's just not an environment I want to be in. It doesn't interest me. I don't watch it on television. It was just something that I had to do. And now my current sport, bodybuilding, is again something that I just do for myself with myself. But, that means that I have had a lifelong relationship with the sport. But I have never sat down at a television and watched a game of something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a rugby household, so I've watched a lot of rugby. Played a lot of rugby, rugby union and league. I played both.
Were you actually watching it though?
Yeah, for a time.
You're following it? Did you enjoy it?
For a time. Yeah, for a time.
Cool.
I started playing rugby league when I was in primary school.
Sorry, not me interrogating you, just like...
No, like...
Not me gaslighting you. Are you sure you would try?
My friends did it, and so I was like, cool, well, I want to do that too. Okay. And then, I mean, I had a few things. One, I was bigger than all the other kids, so I didn't love being like the odd one out, like would run laps and stuff, and I'd be half a field behind people. Obviously, then learning about my queerness, other people kind of picking up on that a little bit, feeling uncomfortable in PE, in the change room, that kind of stuff. People paying me out because I was fat, and they call me fag and gay and all that kind of stuff. But also, I had an eye injury when I was, 14, 15? I got a coin thrown in my eye. And I had a detached retina. And so I can't take any big hits to the head because I go blind. So I've still got, it's called a scleral buckle, a belt around my eye. And so, I kind of had to drop out of sports pragmatically then because it would make me go blind. Yeah, but it kind of coincided perfectly with like, I don't feel good here anymore.
I tore my quad in the on the third game of my winter soccer season. So I got to miss out on the entire soccer season, and I was so happy.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I've done a few injuries like that. Hurt my knee once, hurt my shoulder once. But also, I was then like playing sport with all the, like, I would play sport on a Sunday, play football with a team of people. And then at school that week, I'd get beat up by those same people I was on the team with.
Yeah.
And so, like, it was hard to, like, find a camaraderie of people who just treat you like I'm one of you, aren't I? Am I not one of the footballer kids? And then, after I kind of left, then I was like, cool, I'm doing the music thing. I'm doing the drama thing. I like getting my full arty creative self on. And then after that, I moved schools to an art school and kind of found myself after that. But I have found recently, before we kind of jump into the more professional sports, a friend of mine has started introducing me and inviting me along to the A-League. And I'm like, this is the best. Oh my gosh. Like, what
I've been to an A-League match.
Atmosphere.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Cool.
I have never been to a sporting event that just felt so comfortable, so thoughtful, encouraging, enthusiastic, and just like everyone there was so kind to each other. Like, and so like even in just from the stands, you know what I mean? Like trying to find your seat, everyone's like, "Oh, can I get out of your way? Oh, let me help you with that, and can I hold that for you?" You go to a football match, like a rugby league match, people are like, "Oi, fuck yeah." You know, like you're getting rough people treating you horribly all night. Like, I don't feel safe there. I feel wonderful at this A-League event. And so I think maybe it's not the sports I don't like. It's the men I don't like, or that kind of atmosphere. Because the women's sport slaps. It's the best vibe ever.
Yeah, that's it. It just says so much about society, everything. that just it says it all. It says it all, and it gives us an incredible model for what sport could and should be like across the board. You know, we've talked about our own experiences with sport, and most of our listeners have probably had an experience with sport. I mean, it's for some reason. Oh, didn't we say on another podcast? Imagine if in an alternate universe, courtrooms were our sport. And people filled stadiums for court cases, our pop culture. So for whatever reason, we have decided that sport is central to our culture. And so It is. Yeah. There's a theory behind it, and it's where the Olympics came from, who like to think that they own global sport. In that if we battle each other on the field, we don't battle each other in real life.
Wow. And that's worked for us, actually. We haven't had a war since we invented sport. So that's good on us.
Away from that sort of larger view, looking at local sports and actually, I think our experiences, and as we've talked about, our experiences with sport as children, as queer children or queer young people, is quite tainted. But as in adulthood, we can find incredible, diverse, inclusive local sports, depending on where you are. Here in Sydney, we have just an amazing amount of options of inclusive sports. I think it's just really wonderful, just like your experience in attending a women's football match. We now have options where we can actually partake in local sports in an inclusive fashion that we actually enjoy. For bi+ people, it poses, there's a couple of extra steps because these inclusive teams are, they're usually dominated by the gay community. But we also see more and more bi+ specific sporting teams.
Yeah, I guess the tricky thing is it's a numbers game, right? To put together a league, you need to have a certain amount of teams. You need to have a certain amount of people on those teams, and you need to have a certain amount of people who are available, right? And so if you come from a small community, there's probably not that many people who are going to be available to do that. Initially, a lot of these sports leagues kind of rallied around the idea of like, oh, there's a gay community, right? And the gay community is more so connected than a bi community. So you could kind of put your numbers together. So it kind of tracks that the teams are a little bit more gay coded, right? The cool thing, I know that in Sydney, I think actually even just in Australia, we have an organization called Pride in Sport, which is a part of ACON. I'm pretty sure it's under their remit. And they've got a directory of all the different sports clubs that you can find. So baseball, basketball, badminton, rock climbing, ice hockey, martial arts, rugby, squash, sailing, running, everything. Like you can find, if you are local to Australia, you can find queer groups in so many different sporting fields.
Going through that list makes it sound like, oh, but is it really like, yeah, I know people on each of those teams. I know people in the rock climbing. No, there's a dragon boat. There's a queer dragon boat team. I know the queer dragon boaters. I know the queer
the cycling
ice skaters. Actually, the ice hockey team for their last season, they get to do a different uniform every year. And for their last season, they chose the bisexual colors. And so it's not a majority bisexual team, but their team colors were the bi flag. And when I saw that, because my friend who's bi is on the team and advocated for it, and I just think that's awesome.
That's great. Yeah,
how cool is that?
It's funny how many of these teams I have heard of. Like I'm not engaged in sports, but I know the running. I know people on the running team. I hear like they sponsor a bunch of events. I know the football team. I know the cycling one as well. Like I see them pop up at all the Mardi Gras, all the fair days. It's like, oh, these people are really engaged in community, and that's the part I love about sport the most. It is so community focused because you have 13, 15 people on a football team. And then you have their families, and then you have then you got all the bench people as well and their family. And that's all of a sudden, that's 200 people connected to that one team. And that's just a team. Then you have the whole league, right? You have to play people as well. And so then it's like, wow, like a sports league can bring together hundreds, if not thousands of queer families or queer centric families. It's like, that is a really powerful tool. And we're talking previously about advocacy work and thinking of people as whole people. It's like, cool. Well, maybe you can connect through football teams or whatever it might be. It's really quite cool.
Like we're all looking for community. We're all looking for connection. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we have queer sports where you can find community. It's, the queer community doesn't have to be all dance parties, as I have now realized in my elder years. It's not all parties. It's just this week. It's not all of that. You can find it something that really works for you. It's amazing the options that we have now. It's beautiful. And everyone that I know that engages with these sports, they're not, diehard. Oh, actually, the rugby guys are all very diehard, but they're there for the enjoyment. They're there for the community. They're there for the togetherness, and that's at the core. I've just seen so many people's lives change by joining queer sports.
We've had a few people reach out to us about how to make queer friends in the community, and it's hard as an adult, especially going into maybe your first kind of queer event. I find it so challenging to meet people IRL and just like have a normal conversation. But what something like this does, it makes something else the topic of conversation of like, oh, I'm going to join a team. Now the football, the game, that's what we talk about. But in the process, I get to like be with 10, 15, 20 people on a regular basis who see a version of me that maybe other people don't get to see. It's a great way to be in community, to expand your network in a really just casual, like unprofessional kind of way. You know what I mean? It's not like networking, it's socializing. One of the hangovers of having a gay-centric sports league, that's what I'm looking for, is that a lot of the names sometimes, again, like the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, will have connotations of gay or gay and lesbian, that kind of thing. And this is kind of one of the areas I'm like, okay, it kind of makes sense just purely numbers wise that it happened that way. But you might find yourself looking for a team that might not sound representative, but if you look at the team, there's probably a few buyers on there as well. If you are looking for a team, so don't let that kind of get in your way of signing up or looking or going along to a game.
Yeah, I've got a straight mate who was on the queer rugby team.
On the Convicts?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So funny.
I know.
I didn't know that.
That's how inclusive they are.
There we go.
Which I think is brilliant. I
love that. One of the recent bisexual athlete stories that I've spoken about previously, I found it really interesting. So the UFC is the fastest growing sport in the world. Over the last, say, 10, 15 years, it has just gone from this underground thing to, wow, billions of dollars to be made in the UFC. And until recently, there was still never an active fighter who was out as non-heterosexual. That was until in 2023, I think, Jeff Molina was outed. So Jeff Molina is a young fighter, only 25 or something at the time, who was outed after a private video was leaked. Jeff had previously been scrutinized for wearing pride shorts in a pride match and had some really awesome things to say when he got pushed back against and said, hey, well, it's 2022. Like, what are you doing? I just thought people would be a little bit more open-minded. I picked the colors because I thought they look cool and it's also a great cause. Jeff also said, I'll support anything of a community that's been oppressed and ostracized for some time for something they can't help. I'll get behind any of that. And which is super cool. You don't see that kind of stuff happening that much in, this is like, out of all the sport, like a lot of sports are quite blokey or quite like macho, but the UFC is it's the most,
extra,
right? It's like you get rewarded and you kind of get a pat on the back for that male masculine bravado and that or aggression, that like the having that fight, right? I mean, it's literally a fight. But then the next year he had a video leak and was forced to come out and said, look, this isn't how I wanted to do this. I had the chance taken away from me to do it the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Jeff had tried to keep all that kind of separate, private from social media, all that kind of stuff. And just really unfortunate. This is someone who has grown up and competed in a really macho, really masculine sport and environment, who has kind of dipped the toe in being visible at times, wearing these pride match shorts and speaking out. And when speaking out, got slammed, like got some really horrible abuse. And when it was kind of forced to come out, one of the things that he had said was he was so upset that the thought of his buddies, teammates, and people he looked up to thinking of him differently, and let alone treating him differently for something that he can't control. And so that was one of the reasons he hadn't come out. And this is something like we've heard in other sports as well, people not coming out for a few reasons. One, fear of just the backlash of just copying abuse and homophobia, biphobia, whatever it might be. But that in coming out, the spectacle around it all could in any way change relationships with people, in any way take away attention from the sport that they're playing, from their teammates if you play in a team sport, distracting from the like your job at the end of the day to win a fight, to win a match. And a lot of people not wanting to do that, so remain in the closet, remain hidden until usually they retire. And then they go, oh, by the way, I've been married for 12 years.
Yeah.
And so at that point, Molina had won all 3 of the UFC fights. I think they've actually been suspended from the league for some betting controversy for the last 2 years. I think they're coming back this year. Again, I don't follow the UFC, but
naughty bisexual.
Yeah, I mean, the line that kind of got to me was they had said that he just wanted to be known for his skills and what he's dedicated to his sport, and didn't want to be the bi UFC fighter, or he knew that it would be translated into the gay UFC fighter. So I really feel for him. Like,
that's a big thing.
Not only are you in this kind of macho sport, but when you are a part of that, there's all the other socialization that happens around it. You're not just in a sport that's macho. Your life is probably a bit of that as well. I doubt there's tons of support for someone like Jeff to be able to have a network, a support system to do that. I know that in team sports, it's starting to be a little bit different. We have examples like who's R.K. Russell. We had other examples in, I think it was ice hockey. Zach Sullivan came out slowly, and that was received quite well, but it was a distraction for months after coming out. All the interviews for the team were about, hey, this guy over here.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, can't it be boring? like I always come back to like, let's make a spectacle around it, but also can't we just make it boring?
But it's also crazy because a lot of these sports codes make the spectacle of it. We have pride rounds, we have the rainbow jerseys, we have a big spectacle placed around it. It's very strange in that there's a spectacle forced upon sports people, but then that completely ignores the wishes and needs of the individuals or of the teams.
I am so intrigued by this idea because Jeff is the first non-heterosexual active fighter, right? So someone who is actively fighting.
Yep.
And so they're doing these pride matches to obviously show, hi, we support this thing. Is that for your fans? Because there's no one out in the league. Or is it to show people in the league, if you are queer but not out, we support you? But then when he does come out, I don't know what the support was after the fact. Like, what has there been from Dana White or is that the right name? Dana White, Joe Rogan. I doubt those folks are doing much bi advocacy work after Jeff has been out and talking about it. And what resources are there for people to be supported once they do come out, face all that vitriol? It's an intense audience that follows the UFC, and they're not always forgiving to queer politics. And so,
well, it's the same for probably most sports, especially most male sports. And
well, again, this is interesting about the difference between men's and women's sports. It is in women's sports, there's a large population of queer athletes in those sports. So it is almost this kind of assumed, inherited kind of understanding that we are okay with it because we wouldn't have a league without them. And so like, maybe that's why I felt so comfortable and loved going to the Women's A-League because like, oh, wow, I'm here amongst my fellow queers. Like, this is great. Yeah, it's interesting. When we talk about queers in sport, we obviously come from such a male experience of like, oh, wow, it's so hidden and it's so under the rug, and how uncomfortable that's made us feel over the years. However, the opposite is the opposite. Like I wonder what that's like for queer kids growing up that aren't little boys. You know what I mean? That look at these amazing women athletes who are just openly queer, openly married, openly having queer family. You know, like that's amazing. And I know when I had friends growing up who played in sport, who were girls, who they were assumed to be gay because they played sport. Like being a girl and being sporty meant that you were gay to other high schoolers, right? So I wonder how that affected them. Like what the opposite experience was, that enjoying this thing meant the opposite assumption about you. I would love to hear, if you're listening, I know that we have a biased male audience just because, two hosts that are male, it's just inevitable. But if you're a woman in sport or a woman who grew up playing sport, I would love to hear about your experience. Please comment on our socials, join the Facebook group, email us, whatever. It's a perspective that obviously I'm not privy to.
And especially the experience of bi women in sport I'd be very interested to hear what that experience has been like, because that adds an extra dynamic to it. Here in Australia, we have AFL, the Australian Football League, and that is our most popular sport. Rugby and AFL are both pretty up there, but it's a huge sport here, and they have pride rounds. They have the rainbow jerseys that they wear, the rainbow socks that they wear, lots and lots and lots of initiatives for queer people. But there has never been a queer player. This is in the male league.
Really?
There's never been a queer player come out. Now, I say queer because I'm a normal human being, but the way that it's always... Wait, no, I'm not. But the narrative and the way that it is spoken about in the media, the way that it is spoken about by leadership, the way that it is spoken about by players, is the question: where are the gay AFL players? And that is sometimes if there's an article, the word bisexual might be used once, but everyone only ever talks about the gay players. And again, I mean, we've talked about numbers here. We know that bi people outnumber homosexual people significantly. I think maybe if you asked where are the bi players, you might get a little more success if you created environments where it wasn't assumed that your queerness meant that you were gay. Perhaps we would get somewhere and actually get queer AFL players, because there would be an ocean of bi AFL players in there. Also in the media, they talk, they'll say like, oh, we know for a fact that there are gay AFL players, and they don't come out for all of the reasons you've already mentioned. The distractions from the team, you don't want to be the center of attention, and also, there would be just such a huge expectation to be the spokesperson for it. And a lot of people say that, the first person makes it easier for the next, but there's been research done that shows that if the experience of the first people to come out in a certain environment is a negative experience, that actually it persuades people to not want to come out.
I almost want to, like, if there is someone, a professional AFL player listening right now, if you're bisexual, let's chat because we know how much it can mean to a community to be a voice for your experience. And it's not always easy, but it is always worth it. And there's a lot to be said about the power of that. And sometimes people are uncomfortable because they don't know how to talk about it, because they haven't talked about it. So it's almost just like needing to get comfortable with the idea. This is what we do. We talk about it a lot. So I'd be intrigued to have that chat if someone wanted to talk anonymously or openly about that experience. That it is interesting to have an entire league. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page. It says the Australian Football League is one of the rare fully professional leagues to have no active or even retired players to publicly identify as gay or bisexual, despite more than a century of elite competition and at least 16,000 players. Wow.
Yeah, and despite all of this work that the AFL has really, commend them. But but my point here as a bi person, and we're going to give it to you from our bisexual perspective, is also one about language and perspective, in that the assumption of male queerness is gayness. And it's just that repeating. And if you ask a bi man, are you gay? We are not going to say yes. So I literally, when people talk about where are the gay AFL players, I'm like, we aren't going to respond. We're not going to say yes. You need to ask us the right question. It's just,
it's a language thing. So
it's simple. A grand example of bi erasure. It is a really grand example of bi erasure. And it's extraordinary that no one has really pushed back on it. No one has ever really brought it up. And it also seems that no one really, but okay, here's the negative, the negative me coming out here. But it also seems that nobody really cares. It's almost like the value of a gay player would be higher than the value of a bi player, especially say if that bi player had a wife. People would, I don't know, what would people's response be? Would that be like, we almost got there. That's not quite the queer we were talking about.
I wonder though, because like we know that in political discourse, sometimes the face of a revolution is just as important as the story. And I don't know, maybe having someone who is straight passing bisexual could in some way be beneficial to the narrative. But I don't know, maybe is actually a gay passing, and everyone, I'm doing bunny ears, my thoughts on gay passing, straight passing. Is gay passing bisexual worth more queer point? You know what I mean? Like, I wonder what is beneficial to that coming out narrative. I reckon it takes? I reckon it takes a front cover of Men's Health. Yes, I'm bi. BiFL or something, like some kind of like big Sydney Swans player or something like on the front of Men's Health with his 6-pack out, just owning it completely. I feel like so often these coming outs are responding to being outed. So it's this very quick, I don't get a say in it, or it's a tweet during Pride Month, which is great, awesome, like, do you? Or it's responding to a rumor. Instead of going, you know what, I'm going to take charge of this. I will be the first. I'm going to like kind of light a path and say, hey, come follow me. We'll be safe in this together. And if you go and wave that flag on some kind of platform, I think there's an opportunity there to make it a good, positive first one.
Yeah. But it would be if the first queer AFL player came out and they were bi, that would be a revelation for the largest portion of the LGBTIQ plus community. Let's not forget that. Also, the portion of the LGBTIQ plus community with the worst social and health outcomes. Like, I actually think, yes, they want to have the gay AFL player up on the pedestal, but I think more lives would be benefited if it was a bi player that came out. In fact, I know
it's also interesting because there are tons of closeted people, right? We know this. We talk about this a lot. But there's also I'm not the model for a bisexual.
Yes, you are. I have a statue of you in the corner of my room.
I'm trying to make a serious point, Steve.
Sorry.
We have friends who are not your stereotypical, and I do bunny ears, bisexual individual. They are more blokey. They like sports. They like to go to sports bars. They want to engage in what they've known their whole life to be the things that they enjoy. And for that person, seeing a bi football player could mean a lot, right? Yeah. For me, I'm like, cool, babe, you're out. Love it. Good on you. like, I love it for the cause, but I don't follow sport. It doesn't mean that much to me. But for kids who maybe I used to be, getting bullied, going on the field on a Sunday with my teammates and beaten up by them on a Tuesday at school. Yeah. For those kids to see that, oh, someone is like me and they're awesome. And actually they're the best at it too. That could mean a lot.
Or picture this, the first queer AFL player is a bi man with a wife. They do an expose and she is so accepting, so loving, such a big ally for her bi husband. That would, because that is that example there represents a large portion of the bi plus community. We also know that bi men in relationships with women face some of the toughest mental health issues. It would be an absolute revolution. It would be incredible.
I've got the perfect one. Okay. Here's what happens.
Oh, we're imagining the perfect world. I love this.
So this is how it works perfectly. I'm going to orchestrate this.
Okay, who's the photographer?
Me.
Annie Leibovitz. Okay, got it.
So we know, just purely based on numbers, that there will be multiple bi people, right, in the league. What if a group of people all supporting each other, holding each other's hands, all came out together, straight passing, gay passing, single, whatever, there was this almost like bi, I was going to say exodus, not exodus, the wrong word. There's kind of all together bi celebration of multiple athletes across multiple teams. So you got the Swan supporters, you got the Bulldogs. Here's people just from across the league, right? It's everyone can see themselves in it.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Something so, that'd be... Hopefully we get there.
Yeah. I guess I would love to know, generally speaking, for our audience, because our audience is so engaged with the podcast. They give us so much great insight into their experience of bisexuality. Is what's been your experience with sport, and I guess your sport as it pertains to your sexuality? Have you felt like they've ever crossed over, or does it feel very separate? Have you found yourself alienated, accepted, included? I'd love to know, because that is not a world I live in anymore. What has your experience been?
Educate us. Educate us.
Yeah, as you can
Sports
tell,
ball.
we're not coming in with like tons of like insights into sports. There's some good studies, and I did like start reading some, but I didn't make it through to feel like I could talk about it confidently. But they kind of all talked about the same thing. It's like, we know that there are people in these leagues that are queer that aren't out. That's kind of what they all are pointing to. Yeah, I would love to know, especially actually we talked about women's leagues and how that influence might have played a part in your life. If you are a woman, by a woman listening to this, I'd love to know what that experience and that influence was on you. Do you still play sport? Do you no longer play sport? Any other questions, Steve? Anything else you might want to learn from people?
Is a birdie the same as a home run? How many wickets can you kick in one match?
Nice. I can feel people jumping through the screen right now.
That shows how much I know about sports. So I do feel like I'm sort of peering in on another world, and it would be really awesome to hear from people who exist in that world, because, you know, I've got all these, critiques and opinions on what we should do and what language we should use. But sport is such a personal thing. It's such a community thing. I would love to hear from people who are in that world.
Now, I've got two little asks this week. Number one is, we've had a few people reach out to us saying that they're getting off of social media because it's a bit tough seeing everything going on in the world right now. They're personally affected by it. So they're not joining our Facebook group, and they're kind of disengaging from that. That's totally fair. Thank you for looking after yourself, your capacity, your heart. That's awesome. If you still want to be updated with all of our stuff, we do have a newsletter, and you can sign up. The link is in the show notes. You can absolutely engage with us that way, or just send us emails. We love that as well. We'll read them and get back to everyone. Yes. YouTube, also, people are really loving commenting on our YouTube channel. So you don't have to kind of see everyone else and engage with other people. So that's another way to do it. Subscribing, sign up to the newsletter. That's super helpful. My second ask is, if you are local to Sydney or you are in Australia and can travel, this week, on Wednesday, as a part of the Mardi Gras season, is Queer Screen's Bi Plus Shorts Night. Now, we talked before that it's super important when larger queer orgs do bi-specific things, how important it is to show up for those things, because if they don't sell out, if there isn't an audience for it, they stop doing them. So I will be there. I'll be at the Bi Shorts Night. It's at the Ritz Cinema in Randwick. It's my favorite theatre, actually, in Sydney. Beautiful Art Deco theatre. Come along, see a bunch of bi plus shorts. I have no idea what shorts they are or what that entails, but it should be a great night. It's presented with Biconic, our good friends at Biconic. So it's going to be good stuff. And I'm going to be handing out flyers for the podcast. Come say hey.
Fabulous. Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Give It To Me Bye. We can't wait to hear so much. More. Love you.
Kick it to me. Here if you need.
Go!
Go! Touchdown! See you, folks.